Alright, today we're going to be working on a Bronco tailgate. This is a 95 model. Many similar years have the same setup. So some common issues that are experienced on rolling up and down this window are some electrical problems and then some mechanical problems. So the first thing I checked were the electrical issues. I did have a problem with the plug that connects the window motor. So there's this little plastic clip here that holds this wiring harness. So I'm going to disconnect this. So now that I got this disconnected, I can show you what the problems were with this vehicle. It had been cut right here where these wires are spliced so that someone could apply direct voltage from a battery or a power probe like this tool here. So when you applied direct voltage, it would in fact roll up and down the window. You would ground one wire and give voltage to the other wire, and it would roll up, and ground red wire, give voltage to the yellow, and it would roll down. So that led me to believe that something was wrong with the switch. There are two switches in this system. One is inside of here, which I'll show you in a little bit, and the other one is on the dash. Right there. So this switch on the dash is only active when the key is on. The other switch has power all the time from the battery and is operated by this key. And you can possibly hear that clicking based on the direction. So that should be powered all the time and roll up the window or down the window as long as the tailgate is closed. Now, what happens when the tailgate is closed is there's what's called an interlock switch that is based on these two being closed. And when you close the tailgate, they latch over this striker bar, and that allows the electrical switch inside to make contact, and then this switch at the bottom will work. So if I plug this back in, that will work, and I'll show you that in a minute. But first I wanted to tell you what the real problem with this was. Not that the wires were cut, because I did apply direct voltage. I spliced those wires back and I tested the voltage on those wires and it failed. So what I found was that the ground is provided through the circuit in this particular setup. So these wires are grounded through the wiring loom. So I was not getting a good connection in this clip. You can see inside of here, if you depress those plastic pieces in the middle, you can pull out each one of these clips. So I'll do that and I'll show you what my issue was. So you use your screwdriver and you depress these plastic things, and then you can pull out. I have to set the phone down. You can pull the lead out the back when you depress that. So if you see, there's some shiny new solder right there that I soldered the wire to the clip just to make sure that it had a decent ground, and that fixed my problem. I also took the tabs in the clip, the metallic tabs right here, and bent them closer together so that I would have contact. And then on the other plug, I did the same thing. Down inside there, you can see right there, there are plastic clips holding those in. I pulled the leads out and you can see that I have sanded on them to create a good contact. Once I did that, it fixed my ground problem. So I reinstalled those leads, and I'm going to put this back in its place so the window does not pinch the wires. Now I'll show you that with this engaged as if it was closed, the interlock switch is made and it will roll up and roll down based on the key. So I'll get the window out of the way, and then I'll show you the key switch that also can be checked for power and ground. A couple of tools here that came in handy during this job. One, digital voltmeter. This allowed me to check the grounds. I could apply power from the battery through this power probe and then check the voltage on the ground. And as long as I had 12, it meant that I had a good ground. And that is how I found the problem with that clip. The wiring that we just looked at here, the clip underneath there, is I was not getting 12 volts. It was only like 8. So the motor was not getting enough voltage to raise up and down, even though all the components in the system were working correctly. So this power probe actually is wired to the battery. I got it running through the cab, and I'm going to go plug it in so I can show you some of the tests. I have it going out the window, running up here. I also have a battery charger hooked up at the moment because this battery was in bad shape. So we just hooked the ground and the power up. That now provides battery voltage and ground to this probe, which you can see here. Now I have lights. This is how we'll be able to check voltage on the wiring. It has a display screen, and it will show ground with the negative and positive with the voltage whenever you're hooked up to something. So paired with this probe is also the negative cable for the ground. So that allows you to check and provide power to that motor. If you were trying to test the motor itself, you could hook directly up to the plug, and you could ground one wire and give power to the second wire, and it would either roll the window up or down depending on which wire you gave power to. So now we're going to look at the two switches that are inside of the tailgate. So right on top here, there's going to be a snap ring. Then there's like rubber bushing. Then there's a couple of washers. One's on top of this arm here, and one's underneath the arm. So make sure you put those back in the same place. That way that freely spins. This arm rotates around and hits these two black switches. And these are what rolls the window up and down. You can hear the motor working when I move those switches. So in order to get this active and working, that interlock switch, which is behind here on the back side of this harness, has to be engaged. So I'm going to remove this so that you can see the wires and the testing that you can do on power and ground for this switch, because in some cases this switch is bad. First thing we're going to remove is this snap ring. After the snap ring's removed, there's a rubber bushing on top and another washer. Once that's off, you can take the lever off. And then there is a washer. Now there's a clip right here that holds this whole body on. So we'll remove this clip. And now you can lift the switch off. This tumbler locator matters because it's got a half moon shape on one side. You see it at the bottom there? And if you have it turned backwards, then the key will not be able to come out of the switch below on the back side. So I'll pull this switch out where we can see it a little better. And then these are the wires that we'll be testing. So both of these purple wires are wires from the switch in the dash. Both of the black wires with white on them are constant power wires. That's where they come directly from the battery. This goes to the window motor, and this goes to the interlock switch. So we should have two constant powers and a ground on the others. I'll show you an example of this power probe tool and how you can test the wires. So I've got to hook it up to just any metallic part of the frame here. And then you use this probe to penetrate the wire, and that gives me 13.3 volts. I'll back up so you can see that. All right, so I'm going to probe the wire. You can see it reads the voltage and shows a red plus for power. If I probe one of these other wires, it shows a negative for ground. And that's actually the purple wire coming from the switch in the cab. So you probe both purples for ground and the outer two wires for ground. You probe the two blacks for power, and they should give you this voltage reading. This is the second black wire. So what I validated here is that the wiring to this switch is operating correctly. So now we'll reassemble that switch because we know it's working. Before we reassemble that switch, there is a secondary on this same wiring harness called the interlock switch. It's difficult to see in here because it's on the back side of this rail right here. You can see just the tip of it right there. And so I'm going to pull that plug out so that you can see it. This is what it looks like. So the way that you can test this switch is you can put a jumper wire in between these two to treat the latch like it's closed. Like I manually close the latch. But if you don't want to do that, you can pull this plug and you can jump a wire between these two. I'll show you the wire that I used. Just a small piece of copper wire. You stick it in both ends of the plug. It jumps that circuit. It recognizes the switch as being made, which means it thinks the tailgate is closed. And that allows you to test these other components to make sure that they are working properly as if the door was closed, because the door is supposed to be closed in order for the window to roll up and down. It's a safety mechanism, because if you don't, the window will actually impact the outside of this and it will break, could break. So I'm going to plug that interlock switch plug back in. I'm going to reinstall this key switch in reverse order, and then we'll move on to my new problem, because I fixed the ground and figured out the electrical problems, and then we'll go with one of the alignment mechanical problems. All right, so we've got the key switch reassembled and we've got the interlock switch plugged back in. So now we need to roll down the window, retract it so we can close the tailgate, and I'll show you the issue we're having now. So as you can see, if I reach under here and engage the key switch, might help if I put the key in it. Engage the key switch. It's now going to roll up and down. So I'll close the window and then we'll look at the next problem. All right, now that we've got the window closed, we can close the tailgate itself. Make sure you don't forget, pull on this release rod so that you open up the latch so it can accept the striker rod when you close it. So we close the tailgate, and in theory this key should work. It should roll the window up and down, and it does. Now what a lot of people have an issue with, sometimes it stopped working. Sometimes you lose connectivity on this striker plate. So if you push on this tailgate and it acts like it's going to move, then you've got a problem with your striker latch. You either have to close it harder or it needs some adjustment. And I think this one needs some adjustment. So if I open the tailgate and I look at this, it appears that it's been scooted back some. So I probably need to adjust this further to the rear of the vehicle. Sorry, it's been scooted forward. if I scoot that to the rear, it will allow this switch to engage completely, because you see there's two stages here. There's one position, and then there's a closed position there. There's two latches. If it doesn't make the second latch, it won't close this switch, and it will not allow the window to move up and down. So if I softly close the tailgate, the window switch does not work. Because this did not engage all the way. If I close it harder, the window switch does work. So I'm going to adjust that latch rod. One other common problem that these Broncos have is the rods on the back side of this handle are bent. You see, this handle does not open the tailgate. I have to actually pull on the release rods themselves to open it. So there are 3 bolts to this bracket, and on the back side of here there'll be a bent piece. And it's this piece right here. So we're going to replace this bracket as well and check this connecting rod, make sure that it's still going to be straight enough to work, and then our latch should then open the tailgate. These are just 3 7/16 or 11mm bolts, so I'll get these taken out and then we can look at this bracket on the back side. So once we remove those bolts, we can disengage the handle here. That allows this bracket to move freely, and then we'll need to press in these plastic inserts to push the rods through the little levers. The new one looks like it has some replacement, these little blue clips, so it doesn't matter if we kind of tear those old yellow plastic ones up. It's going to be hard to get those out anyways. So I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver and start disconnecting these rods so that we can replace this bracket. Alright, so for this right hand rod, I used a flathead screwdriver. I went through from the right hand side and pried between the bracket and the rod, and I was able to only break a couple tabs off of there, so we could probably reuse it if we want, but I'm just going to remove the yellow and use the ones as part of this new bracket that came with it. So you can see through the other hole, I came from the opposite direction and pried up on this bar against the bracket, and it was popped out. So the one that was connected to the handle fed backwards through the hole and is still connected. What I want to show you is the common problem with these is this tab right here gets bent. It's the spring-loaded tab that goes with the handle. Once it's bent up, it no longer has the travel distance required to pull far enough on the other two to open the rods and disengage the tailgate latches. So if you look at them side by side, you can see the difference. This one is still straight, flat. The other one's bent up in this direction, which takes some travel away, so this can't move around as far. So I'm going to install this one, reconnect the rods, and then our tailgate handle should be back to working. So I'm not sure if the bend on this wire that may have been caused by the excessive force once this tab was bent, so it may not work when I get it back together. May have to disassemble again and straighten this wire, or this rod I mean, but we're going to try it. So I attached the old rod to the new bracket. I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to thread this rod back up through this hole and reattach it to the handle. At the same time, we're going to insert the driver's side rod to this blue insert and the passenger side to this blue insert, and then we'll tighten up these 3 bolts. There's a couple holes underneath here that you need to thread with that rod, and all the bends make it a little bit difficult, but you can get it up through there. Before I finish that, we'll go ahead and take these off. Now, they should just pry to the side because they are sitting on the rod. You see how it pries off to the side, and then it slips off the end. Once that's done, then you can insert it into that new blue one's the same way. You may have to take the blue insert out actually. Or you just have to see which way it opens up. This one opens up to the right. So we'll have to slide the rod through the hole and then clip the blue onto the rod. We'll position the rod and slide it through and then turn that blue clip to snap onto the rod. Now that one's secure. And we'll do the same for this other one. Pry the yellow one off, put the new one in the blue, and then we'll be ready to reattach the handle and see if it opens. Got this reattached. We're going to line up these 3 holes, install the bolts, and then give it a try. All right, so the latch did not work, but I did notice something. So this handle here is very loose. It moves back and forth, so when that rod's engaged and you go to lift it, it actually drives the handle down. So we're going to tighten those bolts and see if that changes something. So I wanted to point out one more thing about this latch mechanism and why I could not get this rod to release. There's actually like a safety mechanism at the bottom of it. That there's one more rod that connects here. We talked about the handle rod and the 2 rods that engage and disengage the latch mechanisms, but there's a safety one here that when the window's down, it connects to a rod that the window rests on, and it pulls this out of the way. Well, when that's out of the way, it allows this whole assembly to rock in the up direction, which in turn moves these and opens the latches. While the safety mechanism is in place, this cannot be activated by the handle. You've got to have that pulled down and this out of the way so that this can rotate up with the handle. So I've installed that rod, and it's a little hard to see, but it travels from the bottom of the latch all the way down, and the window sits on it, and so it pulls that mechanism out of the way. You see it right there, that arm, and that allows the rest of the mechanism to move. You can hear the latches open now. So I'm going to reinstall the handle, and hopefully it's enough without having to weld that plate in or rivet in some reinforcement to allow it to work. Alright, got the handle reinstalled, and it does pull the latch, as you can see now. As long as the glass is down and it's engaging that safety rod at the bottom to release the handle mechanism, it works. Now I'll re-engage the latches just to show you. Pull up on the handle, latches engaged. So now we've got the handle fixed, the motor's rolling up and down. Just got to make sure that when we close the tailgate that it engages on this enough to activate the interlock switch, and the window can go up with the door closed. So we'll close it. Switch not working. Pretty good gap here, so we'll try and close it a little harder. Looks like it's engaged, and the window rolls up. does get bound in there. So I'm going to replace these felts along here. And I'm going to grease up the guides and the regulators. And hopefully this will be freely operating then. Alright, so I've used some silicone grease or garage door lubricant. Works to spray these surfaces where the teeth are. Up underneath here, the gears of where the motor is. I've sprayed that also. And then I'm going to spray these guides. The window guides, there's these little plastic rollers or square slides that go inside of this track. So I'm going to spray inside this track also on both sides. It's bound up and the window raises and it hits right here. And it's because this side of the tailgate is not closed far enough in. You can see where the window comes up should be in here, lining up in this rubber slot. So this needs to close further, and that's part of the reason why the window won't roll up. That's also part of the reason why that interlock switch was not making, is because the tailgate is not closing far enough. So the reason it's not closing far enough is it's out of alignment. You can see here there's paint chipped off, and there's little to no gap here. If we go to the other side, you can see a large gap, and inside that gap you can actually see that the striker plate, or the striker rod rather, is not engaging into the latch. It's actually getting stuck in the latch because it should be back here on the body of the striker, and it's actually right on the head, which doesn't fit in the latch. Alright, so what I ended up doing here, taking a Torx bit and taking this striker out and putting a thicker spacer in here, and that drove it out enough that the tailgate will now latch and close. You can see that the gap is lining up from the window to the track better. And so now the window will roll up and there's no binding all the way to the top.